Is having a heightened, scarily accurate intuition a gift or a trauma response? Why is it stronger for some than others? And what's the science behind why some people have psychic abilities? Welcome back to What's the Juice podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Amatrano. I'm an herbalist and an artist, and I'm extremely passionate about mind-body wellness, the things that actually make our experience here on Earth easier. And I love to chat with folks who help us to understand ourselves and each other on a deeper level. Today's guest is my kind of girl because her work helps us to make meaning out of our pain and helps us to see where our gifts are, as well as our potential blind spots and how to move forward in our lives on a practical level when we're feeling stuck and in old loops of our wounding. Laura Day is a world-renowned intuitive who advises billion-dollar companies on their investments using her abilities, and to help people like me and you, she writes some pretty incredible books on the side. Her new book, The Prism, explains why you may have certain intuitive gifts in some areas, but feel totally unable to change your life or function or solve problems effectively in other areas of your life. Her book breaks down your gifts, but on the flip side, doesn't rely on them to move you forward. This isn't another empty promise book about manifestation. She actually talks about leveraging small, unfamiliar changes, making tiny, almost ridiculous changes to the way you move through the world that feel silly at first, but talks about why those make the most profound effect on your future. I had such a wonderful conversation with her. She's so wise. She's so motivating. It's just one of those conversations you can really sink your teeth into and come out feeling like a stronger, wiser human. And that is why I love this pod, because I get to talk to people like Laura and share them with you. So thank you again for continuing to tune in with me every week and listen. And if you haven't already checked it out, if you'd like to support our ad-free show, you can always purchase one of my herbal formulas on my website, organicolivia.com. We have something for everyone, from anxiety to mood to sleep to digestion. Whatever you're struggling with, I have personally formulated a blend of herbs to help make your life smoother and easier. And if you're a music lover, my music is also out there in the world on Spotify as o.livia. You can check out some of my favorites, Another Lover and Love Sounds, and I'll put the links below. Enjoy the episode, and I'll see you next time. Let's talk real life, right? I think the best way to move through life is to always be the student and to always be curious. Life will show you either way. It's just how you choose to listen. You can always count on you. You will always have your own back. This is not the last thing you'll create. Play is the process. Sometimes it has to be dramatic. That's the funny part. When your back's up against the wall, you will prevail. You're allowed to grow and change. You are allowed to birth something new. I hope you make your art. Hi, Laura. Welcome to What's the Juice?
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Your book, The Prism, is currently changing my life, and I'm planning on ordering 3 copies for my best friends tonight because just the exercises alone in it, in my little journal, have been so illuminating that I feel like it's just a nugget in my health journey or just my spiritual journey that I've been really needing. So I'm excited to talk to you about your journey in real time today.
Well, thank you. What a nice intro.
Of course. So your book really gets into not only your history, but how you've turned that history into a paradigm in which you were able to understand what happened to you and heal from it. So I want to start by having you first share the background that shaped you and your early life, because I think our stories are so important, and yours is one that is so layered.
Well, I think what's really interesting is that as you grow, you see your story from so many different perspectives. So when I was young, I saw my story as, this is just life. This is what it is. And then as I got older, I saw myself as a victim. And then as I got older, I saw myself as a survivor. And then I got older and I just saw myself as me, and who knows what's next. But I was born the first of 4 children to a manic depressive mother and a pretty violent narcissistic father who was a physician. Mm. And we lived alone from the time I was 5 years old. That doesn't mean there weren't people who came in and out at different times, but basically at night I was alone with 3 younger children at the age of 5. And I also had a mother who frequently attempted suicide. So I really developed my gift from trauma. I developed my ability to get information kind of out of nowhere from having to figure out what to do in an emergency with a young child. I come from a family where two of my siblings have suicided. My mother suicided, my uncle suicided. And on one hand, a lot of that was trauma. And I think childhood is prone to trauma because you really have no power and you are just beginning. I was very lucky that although I don't believe in luck, synchronistically, in my early 20s, there was a lot of research being done on extrasensory perception, things like seeing the future or viewing a remote location or telepathy, but at a scientific level, not at a esoteric or spiritual level. And I became one of the test subjects. And so I came into intuition, which is that out of the blue, correct, detailed knowing through science, and which was great for me because it was away from the crazy I was brought up with. This is my 7th book. Most of my books were about intuition because when I started in the mid-90s, I think my first book came out in 1996, although I can never remember, intuition was this really new thing used in a practical way. The weird witchy stuff was there, but using intuition to predict a market or to make a diagnosis, which only doctors should do, but teaching doctors to do that was very, very new. So my first book, Practical Intuition, came out, and the rest is kind of history.
I think you're one of the only folks in our very woo-woo oriented world today that doesn't talk about their gifts or their unique abilities in a woo-woo sense and almost use that to their advantage. You talk about it so practically in the sense that you almost say this actually isn't a gift. It is what happens as the ego or the body kind of needs to adapt to the things that happen to us and the needs that we have in that moment. So can you explain more about how those experiences from a very young age, losing your mother, eventually losing your siblings, how did all of that kind of translate to this non-woo-woo but very scientific intuition?
Well, I'm from 3 generations of physicians, and I went to a school in New York called Stuyvesant that's all kind of math and science nerds. I'm basically a math and science nerd. This is a wild color for me. Intuition is something we all have. We train our intellect and we train our interpersonal abilities and we train all of those things over a lifetime. We don't train intuition, which is good. We're supposed to repress intuition because intuition allows you, before you have an eye, to be someone else. It allows you to go somewhere other than the room you're in. So you really don't want to develop intuition young. You want to contain it. And that's what childhood should be about. Our adults and our society should contain us so we can function. When there's trauma, your intuition is not contained. And so, for example, I'm the least observant person in the world because I was all over the place, having to survive. But the wonderful thing is, and it's really the basis of the Prism, is that the very things that tried to destroy us, even if you think you've destroyed your life, if you're alive, you haven't. A miracle just takes a moment. The very things that challenged us are also our points of greatest strength because it's where we've had to work the hardest. So we have all kinds of, I had a sister who survived because she was just such a good people person and so warm and so friendly. And so that ability actually helped her survival. And had she not committed suicide, I think it would still be helping her survival. I had a brother who, graduated from Harvard with a degree, graduated from Stanford with a degree, then committed suicide, graduated from UVA with a degree. But his brilliance was because he had to figure stuff out so young. So your trauma can also, with work, with help, and with courage, become your strong point. And it often is your strong point. You just have to dust it off a little. And I think that one of my biggest messages in the Prism is you don't have to change you. So much self-help is about change you, or you have to be worthy, or if you do it better. No, we are actually kind of mechanical systems in a mechanical world. All you have to do is do a little thing differently. and everything changes. Sometimes getting what you want is exactly the change, because then you need to grow to meet it.
In your book, you talk about, preparing a bottle for your younger sibling when you were 5, 6 years old. And you talk about how you knew how to prepare that bottle, not because it was a skill that you had, but it was almost like someone was showing you or telling you. Is that an example of that intuition being so open that maybe you were talking to someone else in the room that was teaching you?
Well, someone was, yes, taking me over. So the difference, people confuse intuition with wisdom, and they're actually very different. Wisdom becomes a part of you.
Yeah.
Intuition comes through you. So when I was 5, heating a bottle or changing a diaper. And in many communities, that's not rare. In my community, that was unheard of. Yeah. So there was nobody who came before me to show me to do it. We were 4 children alone in an apartment. There was knowledge that's accessible to everybody that came through me and kind of took me over. And that was really lucky for me, because I think that it provided guidance for me then when I needed it, and is probably in many ways the reason I survived and my siblings didn't, because I did have that ability to be taken over or guided by intuition. But intuition is a double-edged sword, and I mean, one of the reasons that the Prism is so different than the books I've written before is, the ability to feel someone else's feelings also opens you up to manipulation. Because, if you're feeling someone's pain, you don't always act in your best interests. Or if you're feeling their rage and you're afraid of rage, you may not be able to stand your ground. Being able to be in a different location with your senses, even if that sounds very magical, and there's a lot of research. I mean, everything I'm talking about, there is a lot of science behind, much more so now than when I started out, because now we can see what the brain is doing. Yeah. But it sounds like, oh, wow, you can view a remote location that you've never seen before and describe it accurately. But guess what? If you're there, you're not here. And the changes you make in your life, you make here. We make changes through connection to one another, to the world. And there's this idea that intuition is always good, and it's not. Intuition can help you find the next disaster as easily as the next success. So it's like people fixate on some anxiety-provoking intuitive thing that possibly could happen in the future, and they get a little piece of sustaining data that half proves it, and that becomes their life, instead of dealing with the issue in the present. If an intuitive tells me, oh, you're going to die in a fiery crash, I'm like, okay, what color car? What's the license plate number? How old am I? Where am I? I mean, we are very powerful beings, and we abdicate that because we don't have total control. So no, even when we have incredible control, those tiny places we don't have control often just freeze us.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's so many spiritual self-help books out there that their sole purpose is to teach you how to strengthen your intuition, as if it is some sort of magical tool or cure-all, or it's going to sort of solve your problems if you can just know everything that's going to happen or what to do in every situation. But I like how you talk about intuition in the book as this, even if you see in your mind's eye something that could happen in the future, what that's asking you to do is act in this moment.
That's right.
It's not asking you to wait for the bad thing to happen in the future and sort of give away your power to that. And so in that way, it can be something that actually limits us if we listen to it too much, or if we don't act now.
Or, you don't know that we were talking about precognition. So you don't know that telling the future, you don't know you're right until it happens. I mean, the hardest part, so my day job is I predict the future for 4 very large companies. 2 I've worked for over 30 years. And I don't know I'm right until the event happens. So really, you treat intuition with the same skepticism you treat everything else. If intuition's telling you to jump off a bridge, I would check out that data, And if intuition, though, is telling you that maybe this spice is the reason for your GERD, I might to try it. There's no downside.
An experiment to look for the data.
That's right. And documenting. So all of my books, and most of my books are trainings in intuition. all of my books say document because the mind's a messy place. And it's so wonderful when you do something. And in the Prism, I say, okay, you want to find love? This is the ego center. Go to this thing. Pick one tiny thing that doesn't resonate with you, because if it resonates with you, it's part of that old reality where you don't have a partner. So do something that doesn't resonate with you but is safe, but document what out of the blue changes in your life, not in your feelings. Feelings are subjective. In your life, who comes in? What offers do you get? What problems arise that weren't there the day before? And document it, because that it is in the interaction with the world and with one another that we create change. I mean, you and I, before this started, kind of solved each other's lives in like 5 minutes, you know? And that's the other myth, that somehow introspection is going to solve it. You cannot fix a broken system with a broken tool. If you had the answer, you would have answered the question. We are catalysts for each other. You know, in many ways, am more powerful for you than I am for me. And you are more powerful for me than you are for you. Then, of course, we have the obligation to take those actions, those changes, and continue to practice them. But we need a catalyst because we are closed systems. We are prisms that have been built a certain way, and we need something from outside of us for change.
And we kind of need to break the pattern, which isn't something that we're wired to do as these closed systems, right? We've heard before in many, psychological paradigms that we often look for the same familial dynamic that we had as a child in an attempt to try to resolve it. If we can just repeat it with someone else, I can fix it and I can heal it. And that usually doesn't work, but sometimes what feels like our intuition is saying, go towards that person. But it's often that they're just lighting up your same trauma response of your dad.
Right. And there's a wonderful book by Candace Pert, who was a neurologist, called Molecules of Emotion. And she shows how your neurological system, the neurotransmitters, how they want to repeat themselves. So we find those same situations over and over again. That's why I write self-help. Mm-hmm. I mean, I actually do my own work. I don't do the intuitive work, but I do it for a career, but I do this book, and I do another one I wrote called The Circle, because otherwise I just repeat the same patterns. It doesn't matter how intuitive you are, and we're all subjective. People say, well, why don't you just play the lottery? A, because I like to have a purpose in the world, but B, because everyone has favorite numbers subjectively. I like 7, I like 11, I like 4. We're all so influenced by our prism, by those ages between conception, our genetics, and age 7, where we didn't have an I separate from our environment. It slowly formed. And one of the things that I think people get confused about with this process is that it's not about going back. Research shows that finding your trauma and reliving it just re-traumatizes you. When you do something different, when you go after something you want, even if you don't believe in yourself, belief is overrated. If you put one foot in front of the other, believe me, your trauma is going to be the first thing that shows up, and you'll find tools. We're incredibly capable creatures. And guess what? Where you don't find tools, someone else has them.
It's about seeking a teacher, seeking someone who specializes in that, who can walk you through it, who can see it for you where you have blind spots.
And we're all teachers in something. I'm 66 years old. I would never have even known Instagram existed if some kid didn't say, oh, you should do this on Instagram. I'm like, Insta what? And it became I go on Instagram every day now to do, free lessons and exchange readings and exchange healing. But I would have never known.
Yeah. So I have been loving this system in your book and how you sort of give people this roadmap of each energy center in the body, which is modeled after the chakras, that develops particularly in those first 7 years of life, but continues developing into adulthood. And what's so nice about it is that you get to see both the, quote, spiritual gift and the downside to having that particular ego center or chakra either under or overdeveloped based on your unique flavor of trauma.
Right.
And what's cool about it is that something that you just said, right? You know, this intuition that you developed was so strong, so powerful that it could help you to channel the instructions of heating a bottle. It can help you to predict the market for billion-dollar companies. It's clearly such a gift, but also at the same time, there's a downside to each spiritual gift. There's a downside to each thing that we develop at a high level in order to cope. And in your case, for example, being out of your body, being able to see over here or predict this or feel like this is going to happen, didn't always keep you in your real day-to-day life, maybe keeping the operations of your home or feeding yourself up.
Didn't keep me safe in many ways, or I was very easily manipulated. You know, it really, everything has an upside and a downside. And I mean, you and I were speaking about herbs before.
Yeah.
And one of the lovely things about herbs is that even though herbs have their downsides too, is that they are holistic. They touch points in us that support other things. But we were talking about how the balance, you know, of medicine, like if you have strep, you want penicillin because you don't want rheumatic fever, you know.
You don't want to lose a limb.
Right, exactly.
You can really lose a limb with strep.
So there is that really important way in which when we address something, but we address it with an eye to a whole system.
Yeah.
Actually, if you open one door, you open all doors. You know, if you, I mean, the best example is falling in love. You know, you fall in love, and if you've done the work to not repeat an old pattern, it often solves many things at once. It helps you with many things at once. You know, my husband provides a companion. He also keeps me from sending that email when I'm pissed off. You know, he also reminds me to eat. You know, all those centers that create me are strengthened in contact, and I think that is, and originally, he was my fourth ego center. He was my value in the world. You know, and my connection and my telepathy and that call that he responded to. But it's created a home, it's created so many other things. And I think there's this idea that we have to do so much hard work. And that's wrong. I mean, life in itself is wonderful, but is also a lot of hard work. But change is not hard work. You know, change is really doing something tiny differently and then continuing to do it. You know, there's a lot of research on the value of repetition.
I've been thinking about that with my to-do list lately. Sometimes when you see 50 things on there, you can feel like, well, if I can't do them all, I might as well do none of them because it's so overwhelming. But then you find that if you just do one little thing each and every day, that the compounding effect of that is so much greater. And it's like that in all areas of our lives and our businesses.
And even better, give your list to someone who is very effective in time management and very effective in creating their goals, and say, what would you do first if you were I? Yeah. Because we forget we're each other's teachers. And again, that's why I write self-help. And that's why, you know, I don't tend to read self-help because I find a lot of self-help is very intricate and psychological, whereas I really am big on the mechanics of life. You know, do something different, everything changes, and do something outside of yourself. But I'm very big on connection. That's my self-help. So my self-help is adopting people and letting them show me the way and taking their advice and taking their criticism or their compliments to heart. So we all find those different catalysts in the world. My husband's catalyst is intellect. So he's a former journalist who's now a screenwriter and TV writer. But as a journalist, you know, his catalyst are all of these ideas that he tries on and that he tries to kind of bring together in some way. And you know, someone else in my family is an artist, and their catalyst are all the kind of external nature things that inspire them. So it's really important to have some way that life shakes up your prism, so that you can do something different. And it's important to have goals.
Now, I want to just go back for one moment and talk about the moment in your youth when you started to realize, and people around you started to realize, that what you were able to do wasn't normal. And you
Well,
talked
I think
about,
it is normal.
Well,
but yes,
which
I get
want
what
to
you're
talk about
saying
too, because I actually want everyone to be able to identify kind of like their unique intuitive gift,
Right.
because not everyone thinks that they have one, and they do, because we're all traumatized somehow. But you talk about in the book, there was this hospital chaplain. You were in Bellevue Hospital in New
You
York.
have such a good memory.
Well, it's very fresh. I've been reading her. But you were in Bellevue Hospital in New York, and you had just intuited, basically, that your mother was dying in the room next to you without even being able to see her or hear her. And you were the reason that the ambulance came to save her and put her on life support in this hospital. And then you yourself walked down to that hospital and sat in that waiting room for days upon days.
Bellevue Hospital, I will love Bellevue Hospital forever.
It sounds like you kind of found a bit of a family there with the people in that waiting room that took care of you, and you took care of them. And there was this one gentleman in particular, this hospital chaplain, that came and started to notice, hey, the things that you know and can hear about what's happening in your mom's hospital room are...
First, he noticed that there was a kid who was alone. Actually, the nurses called him because nurses would keep saying to me, "Who's with you?" And I'd say, "Oh, no, I'm with my mother," because I didn't want them to kick me out of the waiting room. So I was there for a couple days before, because the nurses work in shifts, before anyone realized that I was actually an unaccompanied minor. And when they did realize, they sent the chaplain. And the chaplain, when the chaplain came, he wanted to ask me questions, but I wanted my questions answered. And, one thing when you grow up in a tough home is you are a tough kid. So I was like, no. I want to know, why does she have a hole in her throat? What's that beeping sound? Why is there water in her lungs? And I knew, I was, I think, 11 at the time. I knew these things. I come from a medical family, so I knew what was in the body, but I wouldn't have known that she would have had a hole in her. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, actually, she had a trach, and he was like, "Who let you into intensive care? Because you weren't allowed to go into. I forgot, you had to be like 16." And I said, "I'm seeing it here." And for me, that was so normal, because when you're a child, you think the world sees things the same way you do. I mean, like when I dialed 911 and they came and took her to the hospital, my grandmother said, she was in the other apartment, she was visiting from the Midwest, and she said, "Everyone will know." And I'm like, "Grandma, the neighbors know." It never occurred to me to be embarrassed about it. The police would come, my parents would fight, or an ambulance would come and take, it was a little odd for my upper middle class building, but it was, for me, just normal life, and I didn't really question it. And also, it was a different time. The social media now, children know a lot more.
Yeah.
This is the 60s, and early 70s. It was a very different era. You weren't in other people's lives as much. But this really wonderful chaplain basically said, how do you know these things? And he continued to, even after my mother was discharged, I'd continue to walk to the hospital, and he'd meet with me, and we'd talk about these things, and he'd get me a 7-Up, which I wasn't really allowed to drink. And it was really, really lovely. But that was when I was first aware that I was interesting in some way. I don't know even that it made me aware I was different, but it made me aware that it touched me because someone was interested in me. I really think I became more aware that the rest of the world considered this freaky when I was in my early 20s, and there was a real search on for people who could do what I could do. And then when I was tested, there was this idea that, oh, wow, we found these freaks. And there were people who were amazing. Like there was one woman named Hella Hamid who could, because she was an artist, you could give her coordinates and she could literally draw what was there. Like there was no guesswork. There was no kind of interpretation. So there were some really amazing people.
And these are folks you were in studies with?
Yes. And I was at the tail, I was really because I'm actually on the young side. of a lot of these studies, but she was someone that I met that was part of a Stanford group, and she and I worked together for a long time and we're friends.
Yeah.
But it's we all have this, and intuition shouldn't run our lives, because you don't know the difference between intuition and projection until it happens again, when it's forecasting, or even when it's something like telepathy. There's a conversation. Often the conversation's really happening. Someone's thinking something and arguing with you. You're arguing back. Again, there's a lot of research on this.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to eat a sandwich, or you're being paranoid, or your blood sugar's low. So
Yes.
it's important to verify if it's something important to you, and otherwise just keep a balance. And to keep your, mindfulness people think of as meditation, but it's not. Mindfulness is just being at this point in space and time where you actually can make a difference, because almost everything can be improved on.
Instead of us thinking about it incessantly and trying to get more intuitive information about it.
Right. And listen, I'm also, I'm as guilty as the next person. I train intuitives.
Yeah.
So
and it's a fun place to kind of exist and stay. We almost want to stay in that spiritual
Well, you also
world.
don't have to do anything there. What's really
Yeah.
nice, I don't consider it a spiritual world, actually. I consider it more a data world. I think of spirit more as what we do with the data, like knowing that something will get you something you want, but knowing that there's not real human kindness in doing it that way, and making a connected choice. I consider that spirituality. I consider intuition really just another way we get data, that accurate data that we can make better lives and decisions on. I consider the Prism really the mechanics of, this is how your vehicle works, this is how the world works, and here are your interface points. Here are these little things that you can do different. Do you need gas in your tank? Do you need a better map? Do you need your foundation, your treads changed? Like, let us see what's missing in your life. You go to that ego center, you do one tiny change, and then notice what comes to you. Do not keep trying to change yourself, because you can't change yourself.
Yeah.
I think dieting is a perfect example. People, keep going in the same circle around and around and around and around. Whereas often if they just address,
Yes.
what the issue is, the rest of it falls away. I mean, my husband said to me once, "You're skinny, honey, because you don't eat." That had never occurred to me. It really, I mean it, it had never occurred to me. And he insists I eat when I prepare him food, that I eat with him, and it has transformed my body.
It's so interesting. That was one of the reasons that I even originally got into health and herbalism, is because I watched both my parents struggle with a lot of health and eating issues growing up, but I would notice we would go even as a family on these diets over and over and over again. And by the time I started to, I think, study psychology as a coping mechanism to try to understand a lot of the chaos going on in my home, I realized, oh, this is not a diet issue. We don't need another Jenny Craig or another Weight Watchers. This is a self-worth, treating ourselves like we would treat a child. It's like feeding yourself like you'd feed a child, some protein instead of a Snickers bar kind of thing. Like, this is a love issue. This isn't a diet issue.
Right, it's
It's a chakra, ego center,
Right,
prism
and
issue.
it's a different one for each person. I mean, I have a friend who's literally, I tell this person, you have lost a 5-year-old child.
Yeah.
You've lost the average weight of a 5-year-old child. And this person was on every single diet and shake and this and that. And when they acknowledged that their job was so overwhelming that if they didn't cut out any time for themselves, this problem would never be solved, it became a simple calories out, calories in thing,
Yeah.
and it was not a problem again. And I think that we are, in a strange way, we're both taught that we're bad, that there's something really wrong with us.
Yeah.
And we're also taught that self-love is everything. Well, no, there are things I don't love about myself that actually are not lovable,
Yeah.
that I should not love about myself. There are people I have been that I would not want to meet in a dark alley. And it's important to say, okay, this is who I was. I don't choose to be this person anymore, or, or I am who I am right now, and I need to be okay with that. And if there's something that I'd like to change, I can change it.
Yeah. It's really living in an empowered version of reality.
Yes. I mean, that's my favorite lecture to my students is, because they're all about positive thinking, and I like to knock that out of them, because positive thinking is if a bullet's coming at you, you're saying it's not going to hit you, and that bullet will hit you if you don't do something different. Negative thinking also, you're just looking for what's wrong, and all the good stuff is out here. Mm. Empowered, realistic thinking.
Yeah.
I can't do this yet. Mm-hmm. I don't have this yet. And we can always find excuses to not do something now. I mean, one reason people like to live in the past, the future, or what I call the non-local, what everyone's thinking or what's happening at a distance, is it requires nothing of us. This moment, though, does. I mean, I just found out we were supposed to be doing 10 bodyweight squats an hour. Oh, my God. But, great. Maybe I don't have to walk 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah, it's kind of removing yourself from what may be a lot of our proclivities, which is to look for those extremes or those quick fixes, or that I'm all bad or I'm all good or I'm supposed to be all good, and coming to some sort of a middle ground where we can actually take action. And maybe that's why that's not so attractive to us, especially in the self-help world. It's like we want that next best thing, or in the wellness world, we're like, I want that red light mask that's going to fix all my problems instead of walking the hour
I want
per
that
day.
Red light. I definitely
Same.
want that red.
I would love it.
Yes. Well,
that's a really interesting thing, because I one of the lines that you said in your book that resonated with me so much is that you have had times in your life where you've had sort of like a more, I think you maybe said, a grandiose sense of yourself, and then where you've had a really self-critical sense, and you almost always oscillated between the two. But
in Italian, we say from the stars to the stalls.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And I have always related to that, where that was the thing that always kept me stuck. Either I had an inflated sense of myself or who I could be or should be, or I had a really terrible sense of self-worth that didn't exist. Whereas when I kind of sat down one day and said, oh, yeah, sometimes I'm an asshole, and sometimes I do really cool stuff, and I'm nice to people. This is great. Then I could take a more empowered, realistic look at which side am I being today based on my actions, and how can I just change that a little bit?
And also, I'm a work in progress. I mean, I'm still a work in progress, We are all works in progress. And I think, my friend Demi Moore wrote a book called Inside Out, which, people say, oh, her, I forget her comeback's amazing. I'm like, excuse me? She wrote a New York Times bestseller before the comeback. Like, she's done a lot.
Yeah.
But you really see how there's so many times that we all ruin our lives, or our lives are ruined for us, but we decide. Yeah. And that doesn't lessen. I mean, when I read her book, I was just, my heart stopped, because I was around for a lot of it. We've been friends for 40 years. But what really struck me is, oh, yeah, same thing that strikes me about my students. We get up and we do it. Now, if your first 7 years were good, it's easier to get up and do it. If you didn't have mirrored to you a big, safe, wonderful world, then there are things that you need to just not be different, just do differently.
Yeah.
And that's what the Prism is. It's, here are the things, here's a thing to do differently for a specific outcome, that you don't have to believe in. I really think belief is a scary thing. One of the scariest holistic moments I ever had was this chiropractor who had this huge following, who was a healer, gave these lectures, and he had these big raves, and I'm in my early 20s at this point. And I already know that I'm able to do laying on of hands, that I'm able to do healing. But so I go to this, and I'm in this conference, and this woman is saying, well, I've come to 3 of your events, and I still need my insulin. And he said, that's because you don't believe enough to stop your insulin. And I stopped her afterwards, and I said, don't stop your insulin. You could have an amputation. Like, that is somebody, that's not ethical. That's wrong. Mm-hmm. but I should have, I mean, I rewinded those ways obsessive people do in my mind, thinking I should have said something to him, I should have reported him. Yeah. But I thought, wow, that is really scary. No, we should do what is in our absolute best interests. And something has to, it's not a matter of belief. Your tools work, whether you believe in them or not. That's the definition. And if you have to believe in something for it to work, your belief works. And we see with placebo and nocebos, belief does work.
It does, yeah.
But a tool works in the absence of belief. And that's really what is in the Prism. These are tools. They're tools that in an ideal world you would have gotten between birth, between conception and age 7. But if you didn't, then there's probably a corresponding part of your life that's not working as well. And here is a small thing to do to change that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the modern pop psychology paradigm is getting it right in a similar way, where we talk a lot about reparenting, and that so much of healing and growing and making progress in our lives is just reparenting ourselves. And I'm big on that. I love to talk to my inner child and all the things, but it's fun to go through each of the chakras or the ego centers in your book, because you kind of get hyper specific instructions on exactly how to reparent exactly what you didn't get based on the symptoms of how your life is kind of snapping back at you, so that you can be a little bit more effective. Where someone who really didn't have actual physical safety in their home, right, like a root chakra first ego center issue, which you talk about in the book, they are going to have to do a specific type of reparenting that you call no new damage, where they absolutely can't create new problems for themselves. But someone who maybe learned that they weren't allowed to have fun and had to overachieve, which is more of the second center, the sacral chakra, they're going to have to actually allow themselves to have fun. That's a very different solve of a reparenting technique.
And it's also a very different, when we speak about parenting, really, from a Prism perspective, from an ego perspective, we're talking about, we're machines, and how were you built as a machine? Genetics influenced it. But then there are a lot of twin studies, identical twin studies, and epigenetic studies. Genetics is not everything. You can have a genetic proclivity for something, and the switch is never flipped. So identical twins can be completely different genetically by the end of their lives. So what it really is you were built between conception and age 7, and the rest is all rebuilding. And when we speak about parenting, we're really just speaking about rebuilding. The great thing about being an adult, and even being an 8-year-old, is an 8-year-old can go to school and make friends with somebody who has an approving parent. And that child can show them approval. And that 8-year-old who has just finished their first ego formation can say, oh, this feels better than the perfectionism at home. I'm going to do this. And that's very much what happened to me. I come from a family where your intelligence and your achievement was everything. Like 99, where is the other point?
Yep.
And I have severe ADD, so I was at the bottom of the pool of that. You didn't diagnose girls with ADD in the early 60s. When I was about 7, I came home with a spelling test, and spelling is very hard for me. It still is. Spell check doesn't understand my spelling, and I've written 2 New York Times bestsellers. And it was like a 96. And I was really proud. Yeah. And I had trouble spelling the word wolf. For some reason, F and L would switch on me. And I was so proud of myself. And he said, where are the other points? And in that moment, because I had had such a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Roth, shout out to Mrs. Roth, such a wonderful first grade teacher who so loved and approved of me, I thought, it's going to be easier and more satisfying to frustrate him than to please him. And that was our relationship for the rest of our lives. But it saved me. I just got there
now at 32.
It really saved me, because I did things in school I loved. I didn't integrate what my siblings had, which is I have to be perfect, I have to be the best, I have to get into Harvard, I have to have the perfect SATs. I didn't do that. And it was life-saving because a wonderful teacher was a catalyst.
That's so interesting. I will never forget being in the 6th grade and getting a project back and getting a 98 on it, but I was the one who asked, can I please redo this to get the 100? I said, can I do it
I was
over?
not that child.
No, I was. And even, reading your book and doing your exercises of writing out what's missing in my life, what's this overarching feeling I have, is it shame, is it guilt? I found your journal prompts so helpful, and it really helped me realize that second chakra of pleasure versus just like achievement, go, go, go was imbalanced, and the throat chakra was imbalanced. But then I also realized that I purposely compensated for those things. I almost went to the extreme, but at 30 or 31, I realized, oh, that's actually not sustainable. And yes, I built these great businesses as a way to kind of fulfill what I was told, if I have to constantly be achieving and do all these things in life. But I'm actually going to do the autonomous step of taking a step back and saying, it's actually enough for me. I don't have to go any further than this. And I can start to do what I love, which is music, and start to actually have pleasure in my life. So,
and you may find you're young. You may find you love a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I'm writing memoir now. Now, I've been writing memoir probably since the day I could hold a number 2 pencil. But I'm going to actually seriously write. I mean, I'm going to do a workbook for this, but I'm going to write memoir because, there's so many different. We have so many different lives. I love teaching. I love doing laying on of hands-on healing.
I wanted to ask you about that because you had just mentioned that belief can be kind of dangerous, and how do we navigate not having a belief that can get us in trouble, such as believing that a chiropractor can get you off insulin or that celery juice is going to cure everything? But
for insulin, you get a blood test, and if it's not normal, you stay on your insulin.
Yeah. Well, just in general, like with all the claims that we hear in today's world, where everything from political claims to this and that, there's so many extreme claims in the world. Sometimes it can be very difficult to understanding what we should believe so that we can self-experiment, and even believing in a laying of hands might be...
Not believing, trying. So there's a difference. Believing is, I'm doing this because I believe it will work. There's a wonderful quote that I love, which is, the good scientist suspends disbelief and runs the experiment anyway. Mm-hmm. So if it's safe, try it out. Keep it. What is your ground zero, and then document what the effect is.
Yeah.
In anything, in a friendship, in a financial, do different kinds of research. I mean, I use research much more than I use my intuition for myself, because I'm subjective about myself. But I'm an excellent researcher. I am at heart a scientist. Yeah. With laying on of hands, before COVID, actually, because one represses what would be overwhelming. It would have been overwhelming to me to have seen COVID. But the year before COVID, or maybe it was even a year and a half, I wanted to give back in some way. And I started going around the country and laying on of hands in these big groups, 800 people at a time, and raising money for causes that then during COVID were very important to me, like food insecurity, free school lunches, things like that. So I did it kind of as my public service, but word got around, and so it would be 800 to 1,000 people in a venue in a night, and I would train all the healers in the town. Like Chicago is a big venue, and it was often Unity churches that opened their doors, or Unitarian churches, and I would do a healing service and do laying on of hands on, basically everyone in the room, but so would other people. And I didn't say, this is a belief. I said, this is what we're doing tonight. And you may feel something, you may feel nothing, you may... it may be dramatic. Maybe don't decide you want to leave your husband after it, because it may shake a lot of stuff up. And we had a lot of documented miraculous healings. But it wasn't because people believed. People showed up. It was free. Donations were made to a good cause.
Yeah.
And there is room for belief. Like, I would love to do a whole show on placebos and nocebos, because
Yeah.
it is, it's important to remind yourself, for example, to believe in yourself. How do you remind yourself? All the times you thought you couldn't do it and you did. Like, I do this thing where I remind myself all the times that I knew for sure I had ruined my life this time, and I didn't. May have made myself a hard time. I'm a genius at walking into walls. I write self-help because heaven knows my Prism, my ego needed help to create the life I've created. But laying on of hands, it's interesting. Things like rituals and belief, they have the power we give them. Community and unity, when we channel power together, that has a power of its own, and it's measurable. So coherence in a group is measurable. People's heart rates sync, people's brain waves sync, people's respirations sync. And when you work with those mechanics, things that we consider miraculous occur. I'm actually really looking forward to doing more healing events. Healing is something that I always give away, because I do think that, there are these scary balances. It's important when you're having a difficult time to do what's absolutely right for yourself. So, find a doctor you trust and do what they say. Research alternative things. I do a lot of alternative medicine on myself. But I don't do it myself. I'm not an expert. I research it and I find people I trust. Do the absolute best for yourself. I think that we tend to think that, again, we have to adhere to these points of views. I'm very holistic, but I'm also the first person who will, do whatever it is I need to do to be well.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of the ego centers and even the different types of intuitive gifts, because that was something that was really interesting for me and helped me to identify which ego centers of mine I might need to always sort of focus on and keep in mind to work on by looking at what gifts you get when certain ones are out of balance. So I know you mentioned with our first chakra.
They're not really chakras, because they correspond in the sense that they're in the same location, because that part of the endocrine system is in the same location. But your ego is really unique to you. It's not a universal thing. It's your I. So, for example, my first ego center, which is really about my right to be part of a physical world. It's about my power in the world, and it's also about the obligation we have when we become autonomous. And this happens really even a few months after birth, when you see a child autonomously reaching for something that before you'd hand to them. Yeah. That competence those are all different for each person. Although energetically they do correspond, they're very different, because they're about creating in the world. They're not about being spiritually balanced. And, you see this in people who have enormous success because certain ego centers were really strengthened that allow them to get a lot in the world.
Yeah.
But they're not anything that we would call spiritual. I think of spiritual as that oneness we share. So you are spiritual when you have a lot, but you also want to give back, because it's not healthy not to, because at our essence we are one, and all the sciences now really confirm that this is an interconnected world, whether it's physics or geology or biology. We're really seeing that there is an interconnection in energy through everything. So spirituality is respecting the fact that on some level I am you, and you are me.
Yeah.
really is your
That makes a lot of sense, and that clarifies things for me, because it's someone who has sort of used their third ego center to have an immense drive to succeed and make a whole lot of money doesn't mean that in Eastern medicine their solar plexus chakra is balanced, especially if they're not giving back to people. So there's no morality, I guess, with these ego centers. It's more just about
how you function and what you achieve in the world, and how you were structured to achieve, and how you want to achieve differently now. You know, I was structured to take care of people.
Yeah.
I now, as an adult, have more people who are so generously taking care of me. But that took doing the Prism. That took making a real change in my structure. And now there's a balance. You know, because of course I'm not a child. I don't want to just be taken care of, although it is kind of nice. And also different challenges require different work. So although in your upbringing you may have one ego center that is very, very strong, and a couple that weren't supported in their development, when you have a challenge, you may find that that's not the issue at all. That the challenge that for example, if you have a shaky foundation, but your issue is getting creativity into the world, it may not be your shaky foundation, because you have a goal, and that goal may be your creativity may create the solidity in your foundation.
Yeah.
You know, so it's only formulaic in the sense that certain issues correspond to certain ego damage. You know, if you don't have a good relationship, it corresponds to that. Your sense of your value, how you were valued, how you were loved, what you learned to look for, how you learned to value yourself. And it's also the same issue as getting a pay raise. Mm-hmm. You know, what you'll find is when you finally get up the nerve to demand a raise, you may fall in love at the same time.
That's what I was going to ask, because you mentioned how healing your business can actually heal your relationship, or healing how you show up in work can heal your relationship. So I'm glad that you touched on that. But I also wanted to ask you for some concrete examples of, you know, issues that you might see in your life corresponding to some of these different ego centers, and then those small changes like the no new damage rule that resonates so much with me, for how we can start to make some progress.
Well, I would love to tell you an embarrassing recent story of my own. I am really a creature of habit. I haven't changed my slipcovers in 30 years. I like one kind of cheese, which I have liked the same kind of cheese since I was 8. And so I'm not big on change, which is why I write about it. And I'm a real introvert. So before this book came out, my dear friend, who's a big Hollywood agent, called me up and said, I booked you a national TV show with this amazing woman, and I have hair. I know you're in New York. I have hair and makeup set up for you in LA. I have a first-class ticket booked for you. Your room is all ready, and you can have the driver. And I said, no. I said, I'm not prepared. I'm not packed. I have plans tomorrow. And he goes, whoa, 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 whoa. The response is, wow, thank you. And he was a catalyst. I thought, wow, this is a man who basically runs Hollywood. He took the time to put me out in the world, and my response was so devaluing, and also so no, not good. And so I took that. I said, okay, I have a new mantra. And I said, you know what? Thank you. You are absolutely right. I said, I'm going to do this from now on. I'm going to say, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. And I started to every offer to say, yes, thank you. In my a relationship issue, not with my husband, with someone else, that had been really not good because we had conflicting values, resolved, like literally in those few days. I got a couple other national TV shows in those few days. I started really wanting to travel, which is great because it was right before my press tour, and I usually really don't want to. Like everything with that one mantra, yes, thank you. I like really realizing that, oh wow, my husband he plans these trips. He shouldn't have to drag me with my heels. Just yes, thank you. It totally changed my life, and that was in early April. And my life has my relationships, my well-being, things have completely transformed in my life since then. Just because fourth ego center,
Yeah.
I had a catalyst. And I went to because I realized it was a fourth ego center issue. So I went to the fourth ego center and I picked, one of the challenges, the one that resonated with that, not with me, that whole embrace everything, which I hate that whole new age embrace everything. I'm like, oh God, some things you do not want to embrace. But I said, okay, I find this does not resonate with me. This is what I have to do. The yes, thank you. And that's what I did. And it changed my life. And that's so true of so many different things. We again, if it resonates with you, then it's not going to fix what you want to fix. It really does need to be something new, small, because big, you do too many things and you just make a mess. It's like too many paints, too many watercolors. It doesn't even have to be the right thing. It's just not a dangerous thing for you. But you pick one thing and you practice it, and just the making the change will open the portal to so many different changes.
And it makes sense that it's the thing that you're the most resistant to. As someone who always would say, I hate exercise. I'm just someone who hates exercise, no matter what. And then
I'm with you.
Poof. But the year I started to exercise, I can't tell you how many other things totally unrelated to exercise started to open up. And it seemed to be, for me, relating to whatever energy or ego center was about.
You took possession of your vehicle.
Yeah.
You took possession of your drive.
Yeah. And I also cared for myself. It was sort of a resistance to doing something kind for myself. So I think all of a sudden, all of these other ways that I could receive kindness from the world around me started to penetrate my life. And I think that relates to what you say in the book, too, of your pathology can become your potential, right? It's like that thing that you least want to do, or the thing that's most related to your original trauma is exactly the place where you can make the most change in your life. And it doesn't have to be some huge move to Timbuktu kind of change. It's just the one tiny thing that you can do today that seems a little hard.
And it's always, the place where we were hurt is always the hardest place for us. But it's also the place where we gain mastery. Even if it's a place we've repressed, there's so much knowing, there's so much ability that goes on below our conscious awareness. And it's stunning. One of my favorite things about teaching is making people as weird as I am, but also one of my favorite things is when people come in and this is just who they are, they've made peace with it, and then a day later, they've opened. They are able to be a different person. They're still themselves, but they're themselves with a whole bunch of new possibilities before them that are actualizing in their life.
Yeah.
We're really kind of taught to stay in our place, but our place is not our place until we decide it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the reminder that it's the thing that doesn't necessarily come easily to you, because sometimes we need that in the self-help world, And like you said, it's not about changing your entire being or being better or saying that you're bad. It's about just taking a tiny action or being open to taking an action.
And also realizing what is easy for you, because what is easy for you is often a way to alleviate what's hard for you. When I really started as a speaker, one of the first people I spoke with is one of the most, I think, brilliant speakers in the world, Deepak Chopra. And going after Deepak Chopra on stage is a very hard thing because he holds a group with this energy that's incredible. And I was really like, oh, wow, I will never be like that. That's true, never be like that. My unique gift, though, is I'm speaking to every individual one-on-one. So I'm not holding the room. I'm more like a light flies, what do you call fireflies? But I'm touching there and I'm touching here and I'm moving this and I'm moving that. And the energy in the room is light and quick and magical and transformative. So it's a different kind of thing. I can't hold them the way he can, but I learned to do what I do well. And what I do well is touching here and touching there and creating change and creating lightness where kind of a stuckness existed that creates the change. So when I did what I did well, instead of trying to do what he does so beautifully, not only did my attitude towards speaking change, but my ability as a speaker changed.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good example. Well, I guess the question I was going to ask you as the closer was, how can people develop their intuition a bit more? But I don't know if that's necessarily the goal, because as we said earlier, intuition isn't really everything.
I think the goal is, how do you live the life you want? You don't have to be worthy of it. There's nothing limiting you except your decision. So make your goals. Goals are really interesting because goals contain and contextualize everything around you, what comes out of you and what comes toward you. Make goals that are about you, that are things you really want, so your subconscious is on board. I mean, making a goal to be more organized or be a better person, no, something you're hungry for. And no more than 3, because otherwise you scatter your energy, which is often why we don't feel empowered in accomplishing change, is that we're doing so many things at once that we never have enough push behind any one thing. Pick your goals, and you don't have to believe in them. You don't have to feel hopeful about them. You don't have to think they can happen. Find the catalysts. Find the people who have done it. Learn. I mean, someone fairly recently introduced me to little lessons on YouTubes. It's like, it is really all there for you. And my hope, by the way, I answer all my emails personally. So I always tell people to, when it says on my website, email Laura, I'm the only one seeing it because people email me such private things. Keep it short. But I'm really, where I get hope is I see how people do change their lives. And I've been doing this for over 40 years now. People do change their lives. A miracle, again, takes a moment, and you can have what it is you want. It will be different than how you're imagining it, because you're imagining it from an old prism, from an old you. You wouldn't even want what you're imagining. You just think you would. But what you want, your goal, will come. You will build it in a way that's so appropriate for the you are becoming. And sometimes getting what you want actually helps you become who you want to be. You don't have to become the person first. It's like when people say, oh, you have to be happy on your own in order to fall in love again. I don't buy that at all. I have observed that, no, you fall in love again and then you work out in that relationship a lot of things. But sometimes connecting with the person is what creates the change in you.
There's all these odd rules in the spiritual community and the internet world that just apparently are not true, and it's very freeing to hear that.
Well, and things should prove themselves. If you do something and you stick with it for a little while and it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Yeah. It's not you that is not working. It's the technique is not right for you.
Yeah. And do you have any advice when people are kind of sitting with themselves and trying to pinpoint those goals so that they're not too vague?
Don't sit, don't pinpoint. What is it you're hungry for right now? I mean, we spoke for a few minutes. I would know the things that you know what you want right now. And there are 3 different categories.
Yeah.
There are usually 3 different categories. I've just found over time you can use, and that those 3 different categories often fall under one umbrella because you're one person in one life at the moment, or at least aware of it. So don't figure it out. Right now, if you had 3 wishes, what would they be? If you had a genie in a bottle, what is it you want? And you know what it is you want. You know, I want a person to create a world with. I want to be seen as this. I want to not, you know, I want to be supported in this way. Like, you know what you want. You don't, it's like when you're hungry, you don't have to ask yourself if you're hungry, you know?
Yeah.
And so go with your hungers. You know, we intellectualize way too much. It's not all here. You know, that's why there are 7 ego centers. There are many parts of you, but even the worst of us have some of it down. So they're not going to be every part that isn't working.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question to sit with, is what are you hungry for right now?
But not sit with.
I know.
To just be, what are you hungry for?
I think when you have the part in the book, how you write the goals and do the 3 coins,
Well, the coins are to confuse your thinking mind so you can intuit.
But even just to write those 3 goals, I had a lot of trouble because I thought about how the things I once wanted weren't actually what, once I got them, they didn't actually make me happy.
But that's because you were thinking instead of just, you know, being mindful for a moment. Right now, what do I want?
Okay.
And, you know, and perfectionists always have a little bit of a problem because they're worried about making a mistake. But there are no mistakes. You know, if it's not what you want, you change it. I thought I wanted something when I did the precursor to the Prism, and it started happening in my life in a wonderful way. And I realized, oh, wait, this was a good experiment, not what I want. And I switched and the goal, and I evolved the goal into something that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, you know, we don't think life, we live life. So I think that it's very important to not sit with your goals, but right now, who, what, where, you know, who do you wish were in this room? If you were describing your, I mean, don't answer this because I think people's private lives should be private, but what do you, like, if you were describing your life to me right now, and it was exactly the way you wanted it, who would you be sitting with? Where would you be sitting in? Who would you be in the world? What would you be doing? And it really isn't about sitting with yourself. It's about, in a way, noticing the places that you feel you can't, noticing the places you feel empty, and then noticing what the world would be if that weren't the case, and that's your goal.
I won't say something to think about. I won't say it. Wow. Thank you so much, Laura. This has been such a wonderful conversation with you.
Thank you so much. I think this conversation will continue.
Yes. And I highly recommend all of our listeners to please get her book because it is a journey. And these are exercises that I will use time and time again to check in with myself and see what my life is telling me.
And please come on Instagram and try doing readings. Complete strangers do readings on you. You do readings on complete strangers. I go on every day because intuition does give you that out of the blue solution.
Huh. All right. Well, we're going to link your Instagram and
please do.
Your website and everything below, and you guys can find everything down there. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you.